William Blake was born in London on November 28, 1757, to James and Catherine Blake. From early on, as a young boy, Blake claimed to be able to see visions of God, angels, and demons all around him. He was a very imaginative boy with a very free spirit, and from early on, his parents also could see that he would not be a candidate for the conventional schooling system of the time. The Blakes belonged to a church separate from the Church of England, meaning that they were dissenters and did not agree with the theology of that church. This highly contributed to Blake's nonconformist views, which he exhibited through his works in his later life. At age 11, Blake completed his conventional schooling and finished the rest of his education at home, where he was taught by his mother. Blake enjoyed copying classical pieces of art that his father collected, and soon after that took an apprenticeship with a famous engraver in London at about age 15. After a 7-year apprenticeship, he was fully equipped to be a professional engraver. At this time, he began studying at the Royal Academy. At this academy, he dissented with the artistic views of the headmasters, and here joined a group of radical thinkers, which was where he would make his money, illuminating works for radical authors of the day. In 1782, he married Catherine Boucher, who was an illiterate woman. He taught her how to read and write, and also taught her how to copy some of his drafts, which helped him publish his illuminated works. They were very deeply in love. Blake was a freelance engraver at this time and did a lot of work for a radical bookseller named Joseph Johnson, who published works by many radical thinkers of the time, including Thomas Paine, the American revolutionary. Blake opened his own shop briefly, but after it failed, he went back to work for Joseph Johnson. Blake began to experiment with a new type of relief etching at this time, which involved chemical erosion. He claimed to have learned this type of art form from his deceased brother Robert in a dream one night. After this time, Blake began to not only illuminate other people's works, but he began to write his own poetry, which he also did his own artwork for. When Blake combined his artistic skill with poetry, we saw many of his ideas regarding various topics come to the surface. His first book of poems was entitled Poetical Sketches, and was more of a practice, rather imitation, of classical models. He protested many things, such as tyrannical governments, war, and the treatment of the American colonies. Blake sympathized with many revolutionaries, and we saw this in many of his poems. Blake's next major collection of poems was entitled Songs of Innocence, and was written from a very innocent, childlike point of view, in which he dealt with many topics. Chronologically following Songs of Innocence, he wrote The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which dealt with religious topics as he saw them. Following The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he wrote Songs of Experience, which was basically a sequel to Songs of Innocence, in which he dealt with more adult topics such as corruption and social injustice. Blake would mix prose in with his poetry in many of his books. He was also a sympathizer with the French and American revolutionaries and wrote a lot on this topic. Blake wrote the epic poems Milton, The Four Zoas, and Jerusalem, all of which triumph human imagination and innocence over reason. After a brief stint in a different part of England working for a rich patron, he moved back to London, where he died in obscurity, failing to attract any attention from major patrons. He died in the presence of his wife, Catherine, while working on sketches for Dante's Divine Comedy. Most of Blake's works of poetry and art were not highly recognized during his lifetime. Blake was a man who was a nonconformist and who valued imagination over reason. Blake claimed to be a Christian and talked many times about the Lord. However, his New Age beliefs did not strictly follow the laws of the Bible. Blake was a very skilled artist and writer who was able to insert many interesting insights into his poems and prose.